pod. My name is Anne Riitho, and I'm joined by Dr. Tim Gildea and Dr. David Gerstein. Dr. Gerstein is a distinguished senior policy researcher at RAND, and with a remarkable career spanning the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, U.S. Army, and industry, he's left a lasting mark on security and defense. From managing a billion-dollar budget at DHS to negotiating peace settlements in Bosnia, his extensive experience, recognized with civilian and military awards and accolades, offers a unique perspective on national security, cybersecurity, and biodefense. So thank you so much for being here, Dr. Gerstein.
Thanks.
Before we move on to our day's topic, I just want to take a few minutes to discuss the Byte platform. So here at Byte, we do two things. We have a back-end AI-based trade data platform with hundreds of millions of records that informs our customers' analysis and drives our compliance and risk management tools. We take the output of that AI model, consolidate it with a larger list of compliance data, and make it all available to the public through an easy-to-use web app. The web app, known as Byte, offers a cost-effective toolbox for trade and transaction compliance. We provide a low-cost, efficient way for customers to mitigate their trade risk. But now that that's out of the way, we are excited to dive into the topic of strategic trade control, non-proliferation, and critical and emerging technologies. So I'm going to hand it over to Tim now to get us started.
Thank you, Anne, and thank you for being with us, Dr. Gerstein. With your extensive background at Department of Defense and Department of Homeland Security, which also includes Science and Technology Directorate, you've seen a lot of policy changes in security and defense sectors, particularly in the area of strategic trade controls, cybersecurity, and more recently, critical and emerging technologies. From your perspective, your background, can you provide some insight into the challenges in implementing a regulatory system around critical and emerging technologies?
Well, thanks, Tim and Ann, for having me. I'm looking forward to a good discussion here this morning. So, just thinking about this question that you've posed, I think one of the greatest challenges is that we're living in now a globalized society. We don't have sort of the east-west barriers that serve to keep certain technologies away from adversaries and nations that perhaps would not use those technologies appropriately. And what's happened is that we now have a lot more challenges trying to stop the proliferation of a variety of technologies and the subcomponents of technologies. And, this has really made it much more complex for us to put in place regulatory regimes and policies that will be both effective in controlling the technologies, but also will meet our economic and national security requirements. We want to have a robust economy. We want people to buy our manufactured goods, our science and our technology capabilities. But on the other hand, we don't want them to be used by illicit actors or those who might threaten our national security, for example.
Thank you. And do you see a trend towards uniform, globalized strategic trade controls? More and more countries, it seems, are beginning to understand the importance of being a responsible global trade partner. And it seems there has been more countries that have been implementing these controls. We see in Southeast Asia, European Union, and other parts of the world. Should we expect that as a trend to continue?
Well, look, I think there's a lot of international laws and arms control treaties that actually set us up in these areas rather nicely. When you think about treaties such as the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, it provides the foundation for stopping the flow of illicit nuclear capabilities, and it levies certain responsibilities on the 190 plus countries that are members of that arms control agreement. But on the other hand, we also have experience, and North Korea is a great example. North Korea has been under heavy sanctions for 3+ decades. And despite those heavy sanctions and their very poor economic condition, they have been able to modernize and to build the nuclear and missile technologies that essentially have created an intercontinental ballistic missile threat. And it looks like they have the capacities through their missiles to even reach to range the United States. So they've demonstrated a fairly large nuclear weapons capability, and they did all this without having access to that kind of material. And in fact, during one test that they did, the United Nations recovered a piece of the rocket, and 21 different countries had parts that were in that rocket piece. And what that tells you is that, despite the sanctions, despite the abilities or capabilities or desires to control the spread of these technologies and subcomponents, it's a challenging set of issues to try to do that. And we're not very successful at it. Just today, we're seeing what's going on with things like unmanned aerial systems. You can look around the globe, countries that we wouldn't expect that would have modern UAS, unmanned aerial system programs, have been able to field some pretty sophisticated capabilities. The Ukrainians, who are quite masterful, for example, at doing technology development, have been able to set up their own UAS capabilities using a variety of different parts and such. And it's very sophisticated, and they're not the only ones. We've had some other, bad actors who have been up to this task as well.
And that's great. Another great use case are the drones being recovered in Ukraine. We see from our prior experience in border enforcement at Department of Homeland Security, we wore two hats. One was to facilitate legitimate trade while interdicting illicit transactions, which is difficult because there are a smaller number of the overall transactions. And the groups that procure these commodities and technologies have expertise, obviously, in this procurement world and hiding the true end use and end users of the commodities and that. And generally, we've seen the pendulum swing back and forth between increased enforcement and then back to favoring facilitation of trade for our economy, for our global economy. Right now, would it be surprising if we saw greater emphasis on enforcement, trade controls because of these issues you just outlined?
Well, I think there's this tension that you laid out very nicely, and it really came together in your former organization. And so I think that's really an important consideration. This tension, though, means that there are companies, for example, some of the microprocessor companies are complaining because trying to stop the proliferation of semiconductors, chips from United States to China, and this is causing some consternation. And you have to think about it in those ways. The companies would like to see their products be able to be sold over in China. It would help not only with the selling of those manufactured semiconductors, but it would also help with respect to, say, Apple wants to put those transistors, those semiconductors into phones, for example, or iPods. And so there's the not only the base part, but it's also what else it goes into. And all of these attempts to stop the proliferation, they're very useful if there's a need. But if there isn't a need, then you want to limit that kind of thing because it hurts economic capacity. We also know that depending on the capabilities that we're talking about, if they're not that sophisticated, they might be able to be made elsewhere, which means that the U.S. and a U.S. company may lose a sale and never be able to recoup that if that supply chain goes cold using U.S. parts. So it really is a push and a pull. It's very challenging to hit the right note, not be overly constraining, but at the same time protecting what we want to protect. This was really actually what the Obama administration was trying to do with the Export Control Reform Initiative, ECRI. They wanted to have fewer fences, but higher fences. They wanted to have better control over those things we really cared about and, be able to focus their efforts there. I mean, just frankly, I would have to say that the ECRI has been a bit of a mixed bag. I think the intent was good. I don't know that it's really stopped the proliferation of those things that had higher fences around it, or at least not in a tremendously meaningful way.
Thank you, Dr. Gerstein. DHS has an interesting approach. I don't think you see it in a lot of other agencies where it's the shared responsibility between the trade community and the enforcement and the licensing agencies. So it is a unique dynamic where together they try to build better controls, better diligence. And that is what guides us in our BITE application that Anne referenced. We're very interested in providing these seamless IT solutions for risk management, and that's going to help responsible companies and entities look at their supply chain and perform that due diligence and KYC. And as you described, Doctor, from the use cases in Russia and North Korea, there are still gaps in enforcement, and the government can only implement so many regulatory controls where it's still up to the private sector to do their part. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, the one thing we haven't yet mentioned, which is really important, is this concept of dual use. And, I know it's got a lot of different definitions depending on which department's looking at it. When I talk about dual use, I like to think about something that could be used for illicit purposes or for licit purposes. And so, it could be military, it could be civilian, but it could also just be, somebody using the technology for illicit purposes. And the reason I come back to this is, let me just take biotechnology. You know, we look at the development of something like a vaccine, and the first four steps in the development of a vaccine are identical to the first four steps in the development of a biological weapon. And so, because of this, do we really want to try to control those steps? Or is there some other way we need to think about the regulatory framework? And this is one of the reasons why, beginning with arms control agreements like the Biological and Toxin Weapons Convention, you have the Australia group and the Wassenaar arrangement, which deal with things like, fermenters for biological or, for chemicals in general. And so those kinds of international bodies try to stop the proliferation of large equipments and capabilities that could be useful for building illicit capabilities. You have things like the Proliferation Security Initiative, which is really a training program, which is designed to help nations around the world do better at things like interdiction of ships that are underway. It's a very dangerous operation, but it's important to have those kinds of capabilities to stop proliferation of goods. In the United States, we have our own capabilities that we use. We have things like the CFIUS, the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, which tries to make sure that when there's a sale of a U.S. company, that there are no implications or adverse implications for national security and economics and such. We also have standards and norms and behaviors and codes of ethics that we try to adhere to in the development when industry develops something. And so all of these are very important to be able to manage technology and to try to ensure that our technologies are not being used for illicit purposes. But at the end of the day, it does come down to dual use and understanding that there will be times when we are likely to see misuse of some of our technologies. And those are things we have to call out. And if it's a legal issue, we have to do prosecutions. We have to deal with those countries who are not adhering to the requirements under which that original equipment was sold. So there are a host of ways in which we have to work collaboratively to try to stop the flow of illicit technologies.
I have just one last question. Just this, so we know the traditional strategic trade controls, as you described, military, dual use. Now we see the attempt to control the critical and emerging technologies, and you're moving away from commodities based, although those dual use and military regimes did focus on technology as well. But now you have these emerging technologies and critical technologies, and it's been a number of years now, probably 3 or 4 years when this was first introduced. Do you see anything over the horizon that our participants in the trade community might might use for their perspective, for their compliance programs on these critical and emerging technology regulations? How do you think this will all play out?
Well, I think that we're going to continue to see, despite people who say that we're not going to have globalization anymore, I still see a globalized world in which there's a lot of trade and travel. There's a lot of equipment, there's a lot of technology, there's a lot of goods and services that are moving back and forth between countries. And because of that, I think that we're going to see an increase in the potential proliferation of sensitive equipment, emerging technologies. And the question is, how do we want to control it? What do we want to control? And one of the most important things is to think about a technology that's emerging. And when it's in the early stages of research and development, to understand that you don't want to stifle that because you want those technologies to mature. After all, the messenger RNA vaccines that we had during COVID-19 were a result of technologies that were started a decade earlier. And so you don't want to stop that. But what you do want to do is you want to think about the technologies, think about their use cases. How are they going to be used? What are they going to contribute to? How are they going to contribute to the economy or national security or the well-being in society? But you also want to think about what are the misuse cases. And for that, we want to design the use case and the misuse cases simultaneously. And we want to understand those misuse cases so that we don't just turn over a piece of technology and say, okay, world, here it is, and have it be misused. Now, let me give you a real world example that just happened. In March of 2023, OpenAI released Chat GPT-4. And Chat GPT-4 was a serious increase in capability over previous the Chat GPT-3 versions, etc. But it's still, when it was released, it came out, it had almost 1 million users within the first week, and it was putting out bad information. It was hallucinating outcomes. If it didn't know the answer, it was making things up. And so, you had this piece of software that was out there that was being used by lots of people. And I say, not only the people using it, but the company didn't seem to realize. In fact, the company was kind of using us, the consumer, as, kind of doing the prototype work for them to tell them where the mistakes were. And I just kind of wonder if, we should have companies that look at this as their responsibility to understand what those misuse cases might be and to design the use and misuse cases simultaneously to be able to better protect. Using the generative AI and now sort of looking at it more broadly and not looking at just open AI and ChatGPT-4, what we've seen is that are things like generative adversarial networks that can be developed, GANs. And the reason a GAN is important is that you actually can use a GAN to validate, if you will, your generative AI solution. And think about this as kind of an ongoing war between the GAN, which is trying to make sure that the data is right and everything's working the way it's supposed to, and the base software, which is continuing to mature. And so the GAN seeks to identify where there are problem areas, and if you will, helps to validate and verify that the coding is correct. So, developing these kinds of countermeasures so that it isn't just released and then it takes a long time to get the countermeasures in place, try to do those simultaneously. I think that's very important. It's also important on the people who are doing the work. And here, we have lots of examples, whether it's software, biotech. But I'll give you one example from the Department of Homeland Security having to do with biological experiments. We used to do a lot of biological experiments using select agents. Those are agents that are some of the most dangerous. They could be used for biological weapons. What we were using them for was to better understand how to protect people against those. So, helping to develop medical countermeasures, helping to develop diagnostics or biosurveillance capabilities. But before we were allowed to do any experiment, we screened every single experiment through a lens that looked at the Biological and Toxin Weapons Convention. And if we thought it was even a close issue that somebody might say that's a violation of the BWC, we were not allowed to do that experiment until we got the approval of the Deputy Secretary of the entire Department of Homeland Security, the number two person in the department. And we had occasions where that individual said, "You are not doing that experiment," or "You can do the experiment, but you have to change the way you're doing it because the way you're doing it now could call into question whether or not we're adhering appropriately to the Biological Weapons Convention." And so here is a case where, in the government, we decided that, but industry needs to have the same type of institutional committees that look at the experiments and say, these should not be done, or here are the limits under which they could be done safely, appropriately, with the countermeasures in place.
Understood. And it simplifies, I think, and creates a starting point for this type of regulatory control, where even at this point, they still haven't collected all the different critical and emerging technologies. That's still under the discussion. So this is helpful to us. One of the takeaways from today's discussion is that it just seems like it's becoming more complex for the compliance. And we love to work with subject matter experts like yourself to track those developments and then implement solutions within our platform to help make sure companies are in compliance. So we appreciate your time and your perspective on this.
Certainly. Happy to do it. Enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you both so much. I think this wraps up another episode of the Bite Pod, and I personally found it very enlightening, so I hope all of our listeners did as well. Don't forget to check us out on social media. We're on Instagram and LinkedIn, and if you're interested in a demo of Bite, please feel free to reach out to us either on our website at bitedata.io, or you can email us at bite@newborders.com. We offer free 5-day trials, and you can sign up for that on our website. So thank you again, Dr. Gildea and Dr. Gerstein.